Our matey asks, what do you all think about the rise of artificial intelligence tools for art?
So you are a concept artist,
Yes. And you are a software engineer. So
right?
basically, your career is stepping into mine,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
Maybe killing yours. We'll see.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
that's the big concern, right? There's been a lot of talk about these generative image tools just replacing artists outright.
yep, like a giant onslaught of artists' jobs. But let's start from the beginning because a lot of people may not know what AI art is at all.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like a lot of people do, but maybe some people don't.
Okay. So these things have been around for a little while. It's called generative art. And you essentially, there's been a bunch of different techniques. The one that was pretty dominant a little while ago was called generative adversarial networks. We're now moving into the era of diffusion modeling. But the basic idea is that you give a program, this AI thing, you give it a prompt, you say, hey, draw me a picture of a tree that's on fire in the style of H.R. Geiger. You give it a prompt, and it attempts to generate an image that fulfills that prompt.
Yeah, it's called text to image art
Yeah.
making, whatever. It's like Google image search, but instead of the images being stuff that it finds on the web, it generates images. So you type something in, and then stuff is created and shown to you.
Yes.
It's
And
that simple.
right. And I think what there was a bit of a tipping point in the past few weeks where suddenly everybody's talking about this and you're seeing it all over. And there's a couple reasons for that, I think. One is that we were using the the GANs, the generative adversarial networks, up to this point, and they're really good at certain things, but they're also pretty limited. And they didn't tend to give images that were quite as broad. So you might ask it for I don't know, a tree or something, and it will generate a really good looking image, but it's not very diverse and it doesn't necessarily fulfill the prompt like in the way you would hope. Well, short version is that we had these generative networks. They were pretty good, but not incredible. And then there's this newer technique of the diffusion modeling that has started to come along, and that is actually pretty incredible. And that's what we're seeing. There's been several different organizations or companies that have developed these things. There's this whole series of papers that have been written by academics, like different universities and everything, describing this technique and refining it. And we're able to do it now pretty well. And so there's been several different organizations that have done this. There's Dolly 2, which is the more famous one. That's probably, at least from what I've seen, the most impressive in terms of giving it
Well,
something and getting back a really good image. You might disagree. You think
well, I
maybe Mid
mean,
Journey is better?
everyone has their favorite or the most impressive one or whatever. It seems to be that Dolly 2 seems to be more geared towards like photography, like making a realistic image, whereas Mid
Yeah.
Journey seems to be more in line with artists. Same with Disco Diffusion, although I haven't used that one. And there's a couple others. Stable Diffusion.
Yeah.
There's a bunch, but they're all a little bit different. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. They're all different implementations, but they're using the same technique of this latent diffusion modeling or diffusion modeling. I think latent diffusion is like a specific one.
I've been using them and I have no idea what you're saying. Like
Okay.
I haven't even heard those terms before, so
Well, okay. So we had some conversations about this when it all really hit mainstream and everybody's starting to talk about this. And it's freaky. And we'll get more into this, but the this feeling of holy crap, artists might lose their jobs. I mean, it's incredible and terrifying what these things are able to do. but I want to talk about some of the technicalities of it. Not that I have a super
Yeah,
deep
yeah, yeah.
understanding of it or anything, but like I've at least played around with. Well, I got super obsessed with this, and I spent days doing nothing but generating images and trying all kinds of things. But I want to talk about how they work a little bit because I think there's always this gut reaction when something like this shows up, and it just does something that most people didn't think was possible, including me. Um, and so you look at it and go, oh my gosh, this is huge. This is going to change everything. And I think that that might be valid, but there's a lot of subtlety to it in terms of what it can do and what it can't do. And I want to talk about that because I think no matter what, we are going to be shifting into sort of a new era of art in the same sense that we had a major shift when Photoshop became widespread and you're able to do digital art
Yeah.
versus it's a moment like that. It's a big moment no matter how you slice it. But I do want to talk about that. Like, are artists really going to lose their jobs? Is it really going to explode into the future and change everything or not? So I want to get into some of the details there too.
Right. And I don't know the best way to do this, but I, I don't think it's going to stop at art either. I think this is important for musicians and really any type of creator because I think the robots are coming for all of us. But but like okay, so the way I was introduced to this was probably about 6 months ago. I saw a blog post on some this series of artworks and then it's saying, oh, these are all generated by the computer and you may want to start you know reflecting on what it is you think is important in art. And I'm looking at the images and I'm like, oh my god, like this is I've seen AI art in the past and it's
Yeah.
always a joke because it's so warped and
Yeah.
disgusting looking. And so I've never ever even thought twice about that becoming any sort of threat to a career or anything like that. But then I see this blog post, I'm like, this is really good and kind of creepy. But it was so like just surrealist. It seemed sort of niche that I didn't think too much of it. But then I started keeping an eye on it, and just like every month, it seems to be getting more and more uh, elaborate and intense. And so, yeah, in just the last few weeks or last month or so, it's showing up all over the social media. Um,
Right.
and all the people that were telling me to shut up about it, stop talking about the AI art stuff. Now they're like, "Oh, I'm seeing it now, and you're right, it's really good."
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, let's talk about some of the technical stuff. I've watched a few videos on how it kind of forms images, but I'm not gonna even pretend to understand it.
I mean,
Um,
I don't have a deep understanding. This is not an area that I've spent a little bit of time with, but it's not something I'm an expert on. But I can at least give you the basic gist of it. Um, and I the other thing that happened a couple weeks ago, and this is a pretty big deal too, is specifically stable diffusion. So there's a few different implementations of this, but if you want to use DALL-E 2, that is sitting on a server controlled by OpenAI, which is the organization around that. And so you essentially send a prompt to their server and you say, please make me an image that looks like, a pig flying a kite. And then DALL-E 2 will generate that. And DALL-E 2 is a very big model or a big neural net with a bunch of weights. Without getting into the technical stuff, generally speaking, uh, the bigger the piece of software, the more powerful it tends to be. And DALL-E 2 is very big. Big meaning that you can't really run it on your own computer. It's too big for that. It needs a pretty powerful server and specifically a very large graphics processing unit. And that will allow it to run. So, and beyond that, there's kind of these ethical considerations with this AI art, where if you ask it to do something, it will do it. And it does not have some kind of moral objection to what you ask it. So if you want something disgusting, or you want a specific person. You want an image of someone that is famous doing something controversial, it'll do it. It doesn't care. It's not a person. It just takes a prompt and it creates an image. And so this, again, very large piece of software is sitting on a server controlled by OpenAI. And what they do is you give it a prompt, and if you ask it for something controversial, like I tried just putting in Donald Trump, just the name of a politician, nothing beyond that. And it wouldn't, it generated
Mm-hmm.
images and then it blanks them out. Like you're not allowed to see them. And it says, this is a controversial
Yeah.
figure. And if you continue to do this, you're going to be banned. So there's kind of this safety layer
It
with
what it
Dolly
is
too.
procrastinating on, and we could probably table this to get through the beginning part of the conversation, but they're procrastinating on. They created this thing, and they're like, we don't really know what to do about this, so we're just gonna blanket
Right.
block a bunch of areas that we just don't know how to deal with, and deal with them later. At least
Well,
that's what Dolly and Mid Journey and those
yeah.
other ones are doing.
And
Um,
actually, okay, not to get stuck in the ethical stuff because it's sort of, in my mind, not that interesting to talk about. But they will not solve that problem because it is fundamental to the nature of this thing that it
right.
just makes images. And they have a band-aid solution, which is they have a separate piece of software, and its job is to detect things that are, you know, dirty or offensive and blur them out. So there's nothing in the actual neural net that's generating these images that has any sense of this. There's just this other thing that says, no, you're not allowed to see that. But okay, here's the important thing. Stable Diffusion was released a couple weeks ago. Stable Diffusion is the same type of thing. It's a diffusion model, but it's much smaller, intentionally built to be smaller so that you can run it on your own computer. And it is open source. So
Right.
they released the source, you can download the model. It is around 4 GB or something, which is large, but not that large. And you can run it on your own machine as long as you're a little bit savvy with setting it up. And I've been doing that. And I have it running on my machine. And they had the same quote unquote solution to the, offensive images, which is this other separate thing that's just supposed to detect if it's dirty or not and blank it out. They actually rickroll you, so they'll put an image of Rick Astley in there, which is fun. But you can just comment out one line of the Python script, and that's no longer a thing. So there
Right.
is no solution. It is utterly trivial to get rid of this and just generate any image that you can think of running on your own computer. So now everyone in the world can run this thing on their own computer, assuming they have a graphics card that's big enough to handle it, and just generate all you want. And you can generate all the images of Donald Trump you want to do, or whatever it is you can think of. And so
Well,
basically, Pandora's box is open as of a couple weeks ago, and now everybody can do this.
Okay. It's cracked open because all of these little companies, Midjourney and Dolly or OpenAI or whatever they're called, it's all beta. Like it's not even really open to everyone. Like I had to sign up to get on the list to be included in the Dolly stuff.
Right.
And then for Midjourney, it's still beta. Like it's still testing and everything. And with what's the other Journey one? The one you just downloaded?
Stable Diffusion.
Okay, sorry, not Journey. Stable Diffusion is only usable by smart tech people, right? Like it's not super easily accessible.
It's
It,
it's
it's it's easy, but it's not like mom's gonna go hop on this platform, right? Like
Yeah,
it's not
that's
like
that's fair.
your grandma's gonna be using it. But very, very, very soon it will be open to every single person. And as
Right.
soon as maybe this is getting too far ahead, but as soon as Google and Apple and Adobe and all of those other guys, as soon as they implement this stuff, it's open. It's open to absolutely everyone.
Right. So
But
it's becoming very quickly open to everyone, I guess is what I should say.
yes,
But that was the big moment, is that Stable Diffusion release. It's open source, you can run it yourself. And so now it does take a little bit of savvy, but anybody can get access to this. And as you said, it's just going to go from there, where pretty soon it'll be a one-click download, as if you're downloading, Google Chrome, and you just run it and it makes you whatever you want.
right.
So it'll be packaged up that way really soon. Okay. So that's where we're at. That's the the thing that has happened in the past few weeks that is it, and again, it's pretty mind-blowing, some of these images that this thing makes. So let's try to get into this question of, all right, what happens next? What does it mean?
Well, you're gonna sort of explain how it works, right?
Okay, yeah. Here's the without getting into the details of how it's built, let's just kind of talk about what it does.
And talk about it as if you're talking to an 8-year-old, aka me.
All right, this isn't the first time I've explained something. I think
I know
can
you
do
love
this.
to use these giant terms, but let's just really
not.
dumb it down here.
I do not.
Okay, you do love your giant terms, but
Okay. Well, thanks for
I
the
think I have a
antagonism.
basic understanding, but
All right, here's the 8-year-old version. These new ones, the ones that everyone is super excited about, these diffusion models, what they do, there's actually a few different things that they can do, but we'll start with the basic case, which is where you just give it some text and say, make me an image that looks like this. So it starts by generating an image of noise, and it looks like TV static. It's just random noise distributed across this image. And then you have this neural network, this sort of whole system that's set up, and it's essentially a denoiser. So you've seen all those stupid spy shows and whatnot, or not spy shows, like cop shows and things like that, where they're sitting in the room and they have some horrible image from a convenience store camera with about 8 pixels total of, some bad guy, and they're like, enhance. Right. And eventually they're reading the guy's fingerprint off of the coffee mug he's holding or something, right? So that's what this does. It takes this noisy image and you say enhance. And don't just enhance it, but enhance it to look more like Val Kilmer, if that's what you're asking it to do. And so it will take this big blob of noise and it'll denoise it. It'll enhance it a little bit. And it'll try to make it look more like Val Kilmer. And so if you can actually look at this process, there aren't too many. I'll try to link or post something if I can make one of these. But usually you just see the end result. But it's pretty interesting to see all the steps in between as it does this. But it takes this noisy image, and the very first step, the very first enhance, it just kind of clumps the noise together and starts making these very basic, weird alien shapes. And there's not much there, but you can just sort of see it forming. And then you take that image, the one that's been enhanced, and you do it again. You say, enhance, make it look more like Val Kilmer. And it'll do it again. And it'll start to morph these things together. And over this series of steps, you just keep doing that, saying, make this look more like Val Kilmer, make this look more like Val Kilmer. It starts to come together, and you'll see the hair and you'll see the face and the eyes and everything. And it just sort of morphs this out of this noise. And it keeps doing that over and over. And eventually the difference between each image becomes smaller and smaller, and it pretty much stabilizes to where it's, the end result. And that's how it creates an image of Val Kilmer. The basic idea how they did that, because it really feels like magic, is you trained this model or this AI in reverse, sort of. Like you would essentially take an image of Val Kilmer, like a real one, a photo, and then you would blur it a little bit, and then you would take this AI and say, okay, unblur this. And essentially how good it is at reversing that process is like how you train that up until eventually it becomes really good at going from the blurred image to the real image. And then eventually you can just say, all right, forget that. Take this noisy image of just randomness and do that same process. That's not a great explanation, but that's the rough idea. Point is, it takes a bunch of fuzz, it enhances it according to whatever you ask it to do. Enhance this and make it look more like something, and it'll do that. Like in this series of steps over and over. That's what it does.
Right.
So,
and if it's done at all well, it will, or if you want it to, it will take it all the way to a completely photorealistic, accurate likeness of Val Kilmer's face. Like it can take it all the way to photographic level.
It can.
Or oil painting level. No. It definitely doesn't always. But it can do some pretty insane things.
Right. So typically, what you would do, the way you would use this, if we can get into some of the details here about like how practical it is and what it's good at and what it doesn't, I guess. But from what I found, and I've played around with this quite a bit, if you're actually trying to get a good photographic image of Val Kilmer, you would tell it to do this. You would say, okay, Stable Diffusion, make some noise, generate an image of Val Kilmer. It'll sit there and do all these steps. And odds are it'll not be very good. You know, he might have some kind of twisted face or something's wrong or he's blurred into the wall or who knows what, right? Like it does not always get this right. And so typically you would say, all right, make 100 of these and it'll start from a different image of random noise each time. So it'll generate the noise afresh and then do that same process. And the randomness of the noise that it starts with is what determines the eventual output. So that's how you get all these different images, is you're starting from a different noise image at the beginning. So you would say, do this 100 times, and then you, the human, would look at all these 100 images of Val Kilmer, and you would pick out the ones that you think are really good. And that's, you know, kind of where you, or how you would wind up with a pretty convincing, you know, generated photo of Val Kilmer. So it's, and I think that this is a little bit not appreciated, because if you go look at some blog post or something of one of these, you know, generative image things, and you see a series of images that are really amazing, you kind of get this feeling of, holy crap, this thing makes these images. And it does, but really those are a highly curated set of images, and probably it generated thousands of images and somebody picked out the very best ones and threw out all the garbage ones. So it's not quite as, it's just worth appreciating that they're very much cherry picked.
Okay, let's talk about our experience with it, because I've spent the last week or so prompting all day long. I've been messing around with this quite a bit. We just had it installed at our work computers. We are implementing it now. Like, it is mostly Mid-Journey. I've messed around a little bit with Dolly. Didn't get very far with Dolly 2. Was not very happy with it. Mid-Journey is working very well. It's, well, okay, tell me about your experience with it.
My experience is I sat around for a couple days, and every single thing that popped into my head, I would ask it to generate images of. I've just, you know, and I'll sit there and play around with it and, you know, change parameters and all kinds of things, trying to see what it does differently. But forget about my experience for now. I want to say, I mean, you're an actual concept artist, so I don't think anyone necessarily saw this coming, but if AI has a hit list of all the jobs that it wants to knock out first, it turns out that concept artist is number one. And
correct,
surely it'll cascade from there, but like, you are its top priority in terms of displacing. So what is the atmosphere around an actual concept art studio organization? What is your feeling on this?
Okay, that is a loaded question. Wow. And it, for me, it's been, I know you know, because I've been talking to you about this, and you've seen me kind of go up and down, mostly down. But okay, so I'm at work, you know, a couple months ago, or maybe even just a month ago. It hasn't even been that long. I'm at work and I'm talking to the other artists, and I'm like, guys, have you seen the new like AI stuff? It's like scary, guys. Like, have you seen it? And they're like, yeah, whenever it's, you know, whatever. And I show them a few pictures, and they're like, yeah, dude, it's just, don't worry about it. And every time I bring it up, it's just, you know, just shut up about the end of the world and the end of concept art. Like, forget about AI, whatever, it's fine. And then one day, 2 or 3 weeks ago, boss calls us all into his office, and he's like, hey, we have got to start implementing this because it's faster than you. And so then they're like, oh shit, like this is a real thing. So then they start asking me questions about it, and now we've all been talking about it, and then kind of got, you know, everybody's been using it a little bit. But I at first, okay, there's the emotional side of it, and then there's, the actual art side of it. God, there's so much to unpack.
Real quick, just quick timeout before you get into that. Can you just briefly describe what a concept artist actually does? Because I don't know
Okay,
that that's common knowledge.
okay. A concept artist, it's in the name. You come up with a concept and then you art it. You draw it, you paint it, you whatever, you show the concept to the person, and you can do this for yourself or you can do that for someone else. If you wanted to, I don't know, design a car, and let's say you're, I don't know, an auto engineer, I don't know, whatever.
I don't know.
You design cars, or you come up with these ideas for cars, but you can't draw. So you go, oh, I'm going to call Daniel and have him draw up this idea that I have. And I go, cool, I'm a concept artist. So I'm going to take your concept and I'm going to do some art, and then I'm going to show it to you, and we can work together and come up with something, and you can pay me a whole bunch of money for that. Um, and that's what a concept artist is. So in the industry that I work at, the job that I work at, there are concepts coming my way all the time, and I work hard and do research and come up with ideas, and then draw pictures of it, paint it, whatever, you know, come up with that concept, make it a viewable thing so everyone can see it, be on the same page, right?
So you're
So
basically exploring ideas for somebody.
yeah, visual ideas. I mean, it's not just visual, but yes, exploring ideas for someone, coming up with concepts, whatever. And in the game industry, they might be designing a cool hero character, or goblin or whatever. So you do 10 drawings of a goblin, you pick one, you could do variations on that, and you do some
Right.
more, whatever. You come up with one, concept artist.
Yeah,
So that's what I do. So something like this, where anyone, including your client, can type in, oh, goblin character, give me 10,000 variations in 10 minutes. If it's good enough, that's a much more affordable option than to hire a concept artist to come up with 1/100th of that in a week, you know?
right.
So yes, it is definitely a direct threat to concept artists everywhere. Now, there's a lot more to that. It's not like, oh, you come up with a program, all the artists lose their jobs. It's not quite like that. But I will, you know, this kind of goes into what it's good at and what it's not. And there's a lot of stuff that we do at work that it can't do. Like I'll get an image that I need to make changes to or do updates, and there's like hundreds of things that you have to understand and keep in proportion, and know the project, know the person talking to you, and you have to make the changes very quickly. There's so much that goes on that getting the AI to do that would be very difficult, even if it's super fast and whatever. It's so complicated that even just typing it all in would be almost impossible. So I mean, there's a lot that I do at work that could not be replaced by this today, but there's a lot of aspects of what I do that could easily be replaced by this in the next few years. I don't think we're there quite yet, but yeah.
A couple things. So in my mind, from my own sort of non-artist playing around with this, to me, one of the biggest limitations of this is that, let's say you're trying to get it to do some cool character. There's one image I saw of this sort of retro futury robot character guy sipping a cup of coffee in a coffee shop, and it was cool looking. And you look at this character and you think, that's a cool character, I like this. Again, you have it generate 1,000 robot characters sitting in a coffee shop sipping coffee, and most of them are stupid or have 7 arms or something terrible. But you find one and you like it. There's nothing you can do with it from there, in the sense that you can't say, all right, Stable Diffusion, now take this robot that you made that I think is so cool and show him to me somewhere else, walking outside in the park. That is not even on the radar of how this works, because this AI does not have any concept of what it actually created. All it's doing is taking the prompt, taking the noise, and sort of morphing it into, whatever it is you're asking it for. But how it actually comes out is essentially random. And it might have some, it has some notion of a robot and a coffee shop because that's part of the training data. We never really talked about this, but the way these things are made is that you take a lot of images. It uses a set of about 5 billion images that you feed into this thing. And each image has some text alongside it. You might have an image of a robot and it'll say robot and, standing up and in front of a tree. And it takes that data and that's what gets fed into the training. So it develops this idea of a robot, or it develops an idea of Val Kilmer. If you say Val Kilmer, it's using all the data that it gained from the training data to generate images of Val Kilmer. But if you create something unique, it's synthesizing these things together, it's creating this interesting character, it's able to do a robot in this retro future style, that looks like this. That thing that got created is not a concept that exists inside the model at all. So you can't say, hey, take the same robot and do something else. That is not a thing that the AI understands at all. If you say, make a new robot out in the woods, it'll just generate something completely different. And there's no continuity between this character that came out of it. So obviously that's something that, an artist is able to do, and this is not.
Yeah, for now. But there's 3D modeling programs that can look at a 2D image and develop a 3D model for that, paint it, and then you have it and you can do whatever you want with it. And I'm not saying we're there yet. And that was one of my biggest issues so Midjourney it's all through Discord. Like, it's literally a Discord bot, and you just sit there and type to it and it gives you images and you go through variations, upres, whatever. So I created a server with me and my other artist friend, and we just sat there like making prompts and doing images and stuff. And after going through it for a couple hours, it became sort of mind-numbingly, like, I don't know, frustrating and kind of boring, because you come up with this prompt and you have an idea in your mind of what you sort of want it to look like. Like, you got this composition, or, I mean, even if it's very vague, like in your mind, you got this composition of something, and you want, you got the feel in your mind of what you want it to look like. You type it in, and then what comes up is just like, what? And then you just accept that, and then you do some variations on one that kind of looks cool and whatever, and you can come up with something that's like kind of impressive or kind of cool, but it was nothing like what you actually wanted. So it's so hard, and you'll get the Midjourney fanboys and the Disco Diffusion fanboys saying, well, you just don't know how to use it. And that's partly probably correct. Like, there are many different ways to use it, and I do not speak that language super well yet, but I'm starting to get it. But it's very hard to art direct it.
Right.
So you're right. When you look through a bunch of these images, it's just, oh my God, I can't believe how amazing this is. I can't believe how incredible or detailed this is, or whatever. But the thing is that most of these people generating these images are typing something in. They see one out of the 4 or however many variations are created. They choose that, they do variations on that, and then they upres that one, and then they, variations on that, whatever, remaster this one, do that, whatever. And they just kind of follow this trail of, whatever looks cool, whatever's working, they just kind of work with that. And then they end up with something that looks pretty impressive. But it's not serving an initial problem, which is, this visual, this visual problem that you had at the beginning. It's not solving that. It's just coming up with something cool, like way off in left field. Like, it's not what you initially set out for, but you do have this cool result. It just has nothing to do with the project, which is exactly what I'm trained to do. Is you go straight to the solutions for exactly what you need. I mean, that's what concept artist tries to do. They get to the bottom of the problem, and they're problem solving this initial thing, which is very different than what all of these AI programs are doing, which is just kind of going off in whatever's working and then ending up with something cool. Yeah, so that was a major problem that we were both finding, me and my friend.
Yeah.
And it got kind of frustrating because you wanted to do something, but it's not doing that.
So I had a sort of, I'm again not an artist, so it's different for me, but sort of a similar
You are
experience.
now. You are now.
Right, we all are. Um, for me, kind of the same thing. When I first started using it, it's awesome, and you're just
Right.
feeding it stuff and just seeing what it does. But there was a couple times today actually, I had something specific. I wanted it to generate an image of a Tesla painted to look like R2D2, which is a pretty specific thing, and I could not get it to do that. Or whatever I did get was
Right.
very pathetic. Mostly it would draw an image or create an image of a Tesla or R2D2, or sometimes it would have a Tesla with an R2D2 robot sort of sitting on top, or sometimes it was kind of morphed with one arm of
Yeah.
R2D2 was a Tesla and stuff like that. Like it just clearly was not doing what I wanted, and I, no matter what, could not get it to do anything compelling at all.
Right.
The best I got was a Tesla that had sort of a blue stripe down the middle, but still just not even close. Again, because it's a specific thing that I want and it's not really doing it. But if you say a cool Tesla in a cyberpunk future, it'll draw you these incredible
Yeah.
images, but they're
Yeah.
not, what something specific that you're thinking of. I was also trying to get it to do a logo for this little gaming group that I'm part of, and I wanted it to do an alien skull wearing headphones. And it actually
That sounds.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
it did pretty good. I had to play around with the prompts for a while. I had to generate a bunch of images, and most of them were stupid, but a few of them were actually pretty cool. And I'm looking at those going, I like this. The problem though was that for most of them there was something wrong with it. There was one I really liked. It's this alien skull wearing headphones, but for some reason it would draw two pairs of headphones. There's the headband and then the ear cups, and then weirdly this other set of ear cups around that.
Uh huh.
And I can't, there's nothing I can tell it to say, hey, please don't draw that second pair of outer headphones, because that's not how it works at all.
Well, it seems like in Mid Journey, I need to get you using that too. But you can make an image. Okay, so I made this. I typed in like, I don't know, happy. What I was trying to do, I was looking at this J.C. Leyendecker painting, and just for fun, I wanted to see if I could basically recreate that just using text prompts. I didn't upload the image or use that as,
Yeah.
whatever. I didn't plug that in directly. I'm going to come up with some prompts and see if it will create something similar to this.
Right.
And so I'm like, and it's this painting of this kid fishing on a dock, and he's happy and smiling, and it's like the 1920s or whatever. So I type in, kid fishing, smiling, happy, sitting on a dock, wearing a hat or something. And then it, starts with the fuzzy, blurry stuff, and it shows me like 4 different ones or whatever, and it, gets closer, and I'm like, oh wow, that looks pretty good. And then it keeps getting clearer and clearer, and then it's like this kid, and he's like, his torso is morphed into the dock. Of course, he has like no legs. He's like, I don't know, morphed into this weird jacket thing. He's got a fishing pole, but of course it's all messed up. And then his hand is a fish. Like his whole hand and arm is just this weird fish. And it's like, it was, yeah, I ended up with some very creepy results, right? So I do a couple variations and I keep working it out. And then I get to one and he's still morphed. Like he's very, like his face is all weird and his hand fish is still kind of weird and his torso's all messed up, whatever. But
Yeah.
like the style was there and it looked good if you just didn't look at it. So, but Midjourney has this new button. It's or option or whatever of remaster, whatever it means. I don't really know. I just click it, and it seems to. And this, don't take my word for this, but this is what it seems to do. It seems to recognize what's actually in the scene and then compare it. It sort of throws out the earlier prompts of style or whatever you tell it to do, and just kind of focuses on cleaning up the objects in the scene. So it recognizes that it's a face, gets the general like
Right.
direction of the face, and it cleans it up. And then it looks at the fishing pole and cleans it up. And it looks at the dock and cleans it up, and all the trees in the background. It just cleans everything up. And it fixes like the warped forms and the creepy alien stuff that's going on. It lost it lost all of the charm that it originally had, but it cleaned it all up. So I think there's something or they're doing something to sort of fix that, fix the weird warpiness, and it would fix the headphones. Like it would recognize their headphones. There
Yeah.
aren't two pairs of headphones, and it would, theoretically fix that. It seems to be what
Yeah.
it's kind of doing. It's taking like an overall look of the scene, scanning it for what's actually in there, and then applying some kind of filter on top of that.
And I guess we'll have to see how far that gets.
Yeah.
The At least for now, these latent diffusion models, like we said, they're really good at starting from somewhere, or I would call it, I would term it like this: the divergent process is very good, in the sense that you start from something and it just gives you a ton of things. Some of them nothing like you are picturing, and sometimes they're really cool. But if you're trying to converge on something specific that you want, it just really doesn't do that. You can't take an image and tell it procedurally, okay, remove the headphones, okay, make it this color, make it that color. The remastering thing is interesting, and maybe that develops to a point where it starts to become really good at that. But it sounds like it's sort of a separate process that's not really respecting the what you were doing originally.
Right, but once again, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but this is in its absolute infancy without it even really being out. Now, it's cool to hear your side because you're a programmer, like you actually make things,
Right.
but this little remaster thing, it literally came out like a couple days ago, right? I mean, all
Right.
this stuff is so fresh. The fact that they're even thinking about this type of thing, solving these problems, is what becomes a bit scary to me as a concept artist. I
Okay, well,
mean,
that's what I
go
really
ahead.
want to get into here, actually, that specifically. So there is that argument of, okay, this is what we've got and it's amazing, but of course it has all these major flaws, but it's only the beginning and it's going to get better and better. I don't necessarily agree with that. First thing to think about is that this is not brand new at all. We've been doing generative AI imagery for a little while, and the previous state of the art was these GANs, these generative adversarial networks, neural networks. And the reason why things got so much more interesting now is because we had GANs and they were kind of topped out. We were, you could feed it the training data, you use all the techniques everybody knows about, and you get some really interesting results. But again, it was just pretty limited on these different areas, and we just really weren't getting past that. And it took an entirely different technique, like a fundamentally different technique of this diffusion modeling, this, starting with a noisy image and denoising it over time. That's what it took to get to the sort of next level of, holy crap, now it can do this and this, and we're all excited about that. But we will explore that space, and I don't know, right? This is future predicting, but we will probably get to a point where it doesn't tend to get a whole lot better. And you can even look at Stable Diffusion's sort of progression, where they set up the architecture, they have the neural net, they have all the components around that and everything, and then they start training it on this set of 5 billion images. And so after X amount of training, they have this graph of basically how good it is at generating realistic images, and they have some way of analyzing that essentially. And so after so many steps, it gets to, this level. And then you run it again, do a whole bunch more training, and it gets to this level, and then this level. But then you keep going, and it's like tiny, tiny little improvements to where now they can do more training and it doesn't really get anywhere. It just tops out. So it's possible that we'll have new techniques and better ways of engineering it, but it's also possible that we won't, and that it'll kind of get to where the GANs were, and that it's sort of just topped out, and we're just doing everything we can with these techniques to it. I know you're kind of
Well, okay, I have mixed feelings on this. It's not like I'm
yeah.
thinking, "Oh my God, my career's over." I got to start applying at fast food places. Like I don't, like I'm not thinking like that. But what this is a huge change. I mean, this is absolutely enormous. This is a
Yes.
huge change in the industry, and I don't know what it means just yet. I really don't, because it hasn't taken any work away from me yet. But just like you said, you wanted a logo. So where did you go? You didn't call up an artist. You started typing it in. And that's what everyone else will be doing. Every client I've ever had. If it's cheaper, they will do it. If it's more efficient, they will do it. It doesn't matter if the quality suffers a bit. If it's cheaper, that's how business works, right? So there will be a major shift in the industry of being an artist. And it's not just the mainstream entertainment industry that I'm in, it's the freelance industry for one-off jobs. There's a lot of lower level artists just starting out or whatever who would love to do logo design or whatever. But that will be wiped
Yeah.
from the job sites very soon and easily. And so it's going to change things drastically. I do not think that the computer will be sitting at my seat on Monday when I walk in and I will be asked to leave. Like I'm not even close to that. But the reason why I think this is going to take off and it will reach new heights, and this is not the end of it, is because now there is so much money involved. So much. This can be used by everyone, okay? It's not like Adobe Photoshop, which targets artists. This is image creation for every human that has a computer or phone or whatever, okay? So if you just look at Midjourney, their Discord server is just like exploding every day. There's just more and more people. They're just blowing up. And Disco Diffusion and Dolly 2 and I can't, whatever program you're using, whatever. And these are just like the little guys at the beginning. I mean, when Apple and Google step in and start playing with this stuff, there will be so much money involved in this that it cannot help but innovate more and get better and better and better. And okay, with that being said, like there's so many different sides to this. But with that being said, like when you call a company because I don't know, they didn't ship your package or whatever. Like it doesn't matter how good their little robot voice is on the phone. Like if you could just speak to a goddamn human, you could get it done so quickly. And I think that aspect of it,
Yeah.
I mean, solving visual problems is so complicated. So a person trained in doing that, in my mind, at least for now, it will definitely be much better. But they have to be pretty well trained, and it has to be a pretty specialized, complicated job. But all of the low level stuff will be wiped out almost immediately. Like, cranking out 10 goblin characters, unless they have to be like super worked up and complicated, that job will go to whoever just types it into the computer first. Like starting yesterday. Okay, so jobs are disappearing and they will disappear more. So I think it will improve more. I guess I kind of went off on a tangent there, but because there will be so much money involved, and this is like you're saying this disco fusion stuff is like the technique that they're exploring right now, right? And maybe it's sort of reached its peak.
I'm not
close.
I don't
to its
know
peak.
that it's reached its peak, but okay, there's kind of two different threads that we're looking at here. One, I 100% agree with you. I think a couple weeks ago we hit a major shift in just tech and the world and everything. And I mean, I don't know how many, but there were a lot of jobs that just were gone. I mean, even for me in my silly little gaming community, not silly, I love those guys, but just tiny thing where we're like, oh, we need a new logo. Somebody had contacted their aspiring artist friend to say, hey, could you draw some stuff? And this person is very new, and so they did some work, and you're kind of like, all right, this is cool, it's not great. And then I throw something into Stable Diffusion, I get 1,000 different images, and a lot of them are really cool. And there's this feeling of, forget this guy, this is free and it's impressive. And if we need to clean up the extra headphone thing, we will, whatever. I mean, it gives you that feeling of, there's this whole slice of society that's there's no more jobs for you. And
no amount of positive thinking and and inspirational quotes that you
Yep.
throw at this thing, like it doesn't.
Right.
This thing is powerful, and it is coming. Like 6 months ago, I saw the little red light, like on my chest, and
Yeah.
and you just get this feeling that you're going to be sniped. You don't know when, but it's going to happen. And I don't know. There's a lot of different avenues for artists. There's a lot of different ways of thinking of this. And I don't know if it's as black and white as artists or programmers, or, it's
Yeah.
one or the other. It's all I know is that this is going to change things in a huge way.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yes.
know. I don't know
Okay.
how, though.
That all right. That and I 100% agree with that. I also don't exactly know how. There's okay. As you said, this is just starting. I mean, anybody can do this now, but most people haven't. But very, very soon, this will just become available to anyone, and you run it like a program on your computer or a website that you just open, and you can generate all these images. So you can already do that. You're just sort of limited on how many you can do. But
Right.
yeah, so Pandora's box is rapidly opening. Uh, there is I'm pretty confident that there are things that this is just not going to be able to do. What we were describing earlier, how it can generate a character, but it can't really take that character and do things with it. I don't personally, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I don't really see that changing. Or if it is, it would be a very fundamental shift to the way it works, where you could get to a point where you could say, okay, now take this character and show me it in all these different situations. That's just
Well,
not
it's
what the model is built to do.
not this model, but it's in my non-programming brain, it's just a combination of this model and another model, which is,
Maybe.
I mean, you do 3D scans or you have programs that can scan a 2D image and turn it into a 3D model. So it's
Yes.
just,
And it could be that. It could be a collection of different pieces. I mean, we already see that with trying to keep you from seeing boobs and stuff. Like they already have these separate
right.
models that's trying to make sure that nothing offensive gets through, or what they deem offensive. So yes, but we've gotten this far on this problem, this image generating. It doesn't mean that we're at the same level at all with another technique that's able to extract the features of a unique character out of an image and redraw that in other places. Like that is like a whole different area that
Yeah.
we may not have any ideas on. Again, I'm really not the expert in this field, but we're really good at this right now. I'm not sure how much farther it's going to go, at least in terms of the quality of this specifically. I mean, you can see these flaws across the board in all these different implementations of diffusion modeling, right? You go to DALL-E 2, you can go to Midjourney, you can go to Disco Diffusion and Stable Diffusion, all
Yeah.
these different
And
things. You give it a prompt, and you're going to see the same types of results. Some are a little better than others at different things, but still, it's not at the point where it's just giving you these incredible images every time. And those are all different groups working on different implementations, coming from the same conceptual ideas, trying to build this thing. And they're all at roughly the same point in that they have the same limitations. So I don't think it's a given at all that those are going to be overcome anytime soon, or ever. Probably ever. I wouldn't want to say that, but I mean, because it feels like that's achievable. But what we have right now, I don't think it's correct to just assume that it's going to evolve off into
yeah.
infinity. It's more like it's going to taper off and do the opposite, where it will evolve more, but it kind of becomes stable. What will happen, and already is happening, is we start to explore different ways of using that technique. So it's already
Hmm.
being done for video. I saw some guy set
Yeah.
this up, where you basically just have it run on every single frame of a cartoon and try to make it
Right.
3D. And it actually is pretty impressive already, even with the very simple approach of just extracting every single image. So it's going to be used for video. It's going to be used for all kinds of things. Personally, I think the way that it's going to wind up being used a lot, I don't know if we actually mentioned this, but uh, it's not just a text to image process. It's also image to image with a
Right.
guided prompt. So you can take an image. I mean, when you're generating an image, it just starts with static. But you could also just give it an image that somebody drew, some cartoony MS Paint thing of a castle on a hill or something and say, okay, Stable Diffusion, make this cartoony MS Paint image of a castle on a hill look more like an epic medieval, art piece that's done digitally with this style or something. And it will take that and morph it, enhance it to look more like that. And actually, the results you can get that way are really impressive. Uh,
Hmm.
so I think the way it's going to wind up being used, especially in those types of contexts where somebody's asking for something more specific, is where an artist is working alongside it. And I've seen some examples of this. I personally haven't tried it, but even when you're generating an image, let's take that, alien skull wearing headphones thing that I was doing. Again, it starts from static and it starts to sort of sculpt and morph these features out of that static. And you can see them evolve as it goes, like each step of this process. So, what you could do as an artist is you could look at step 7, where these outer headphone weird things start to appear. You can just take that image and delete them, or, use the Photoshop clone tool or
Hmm.
something where you just wipe them out and then continue the process from there. And now you don't have this weird thing that's sort of being morphed out of the background of the image. You've just removed it. And most likely, if you're able to get it right, then whatever diffusion model you're using will continue along that process, but this time it won't have those other weird artifacts in it. So probably it'll be used that way a lot. I'm sure we're
Right.
already seeing it, but it's going to be built right into the tools that you use, where you have this little magic thing and you say AI enhance, and it takes this thing and moves it one step, and then you make your edits, and then it moves it another step. I think
Yeah,
that's where that's
absolutely.
headed. Yeah.
And looking at browsing through a lot of this stuff, the best images are definitely being made by artists.
Right.
Like a good artist can make a good, AI piece because
Right.
they know what's working and they know how to edit it a little bit. Whereas the general public, a lot of the images just look the same.
Right.
It's weird.
Right.
So I think, okay, I guess I should kind of explain myself. The thing that kind of fills me with dread is it's not so much that I feel like I'll be losing my job, right? Or that my career will just be over. I will not be able to find work anywhere. What it is it's this threat of the way that I love working coming to an end, which has when I started getting into art, like God, like 8 9 years ago. It was almost like 10 years. Anyway, when I started getting into art back then, there were still traditional artists in the industry, like Sid
Yeah.
Mead. Well, James Gurney still is working, but he's in pretty much independent, does his own thing. But
He's
there
sort
was
of a
still like,
famous guy at this point, right? I feel
yeah,
like that
he's
doesn't really count. If once you're famous, you do what you want.
yes, he is an outlier. He doesn't count. So anyway, there was Sid Mead. Oh God, he was also kind of an outlier. Anyway, there were people working traditionally in the industry. They were beginning to come to an end, but it gave me a glimmer of hope of like, oh, if I get really good at traditional art, maybe I can be a traditional artist in the industry. A couple years later, I start looking for jobs. Every single one of them requires you to work in Photoshop
Yeah.
because it's better? Not necessarily. It's because it's faster and more efficient. So you need to work in Photoshop. So I learned Photoshop, I adapt, and then I get a job where I work in Photoshop. I'm still able to work in some pencil drawings and whatever, but I'm pretty much working in Photoshop. And then, but I'm okay with that because back then, about 5 6 years ago, I'm drawing in Photoshop. So it's, you grab your pencil tool, and even though it's digital, you're still drawing. I mean, it's the same
Yeah.
actions. You got to use the same thought processes. You got to think about the same stuff. So I'm drawing in a painting in Photoshop. Even though it's digital, it still resembles what I love doing. A couple years later, so about 3 years ago, well, okay, 5 years ago, 3D models started becoming really popular. But about 3 years ago, they became like our way of working at work for most of the stuff we do. Clients demand it. The workplace demands it. Like our process changes to adapt to the most efficient tool or the most efficient thing. So 3D models become this huge part of our process. Some artists love working with 3D models. I don't. I do it a little bit, and there's aspects I enjoy, but for the most part, it takes away my joy of drawing and my joy of painting and gives me this pre-built manufactured thing. They give it to me and say, make it look good. So I have to take the 3D model and make it look good and, change things here or there. And I do a little drawing or little bits of painting here and there.
Right.
But the percentage of what I love doing, versus the stuff that's included in the job but I don't enjoy doing, that percentage that I love doing is getting smaller and smaller every year. And this
Yeah.
AI art to me is like the final nail or one of the final nails in the coffin of the thing that I love doing for this specific industry that I work in, because the workflow will adapt to that efficiency and I will be forced to use that, which for other people, they may be ecstatic about that. So this is a very personal reaction from me seeing this kind of technology. It threatens what I love to do even more. It says, okay, now for sure, there are no more traditional artists working in this type of job. Just no more ever again. We want to be all computers. And I'm sure there's little pockets of that, traditional artists can live. But I'm going to keep going on this tangent. There's basically 3 different categories that I look at, my art career. And I think, for anyone else, they probably have a couple different categories as well. Number 1, which is where I'm working right now, is like the mainstream industry, right? Mainstream clients, whatever. It's like the general, I don't know, accumulation of artists. Like that's just kind of, I don't know, it's the mainstream. Number 2 is freelance, which are these kind of odd jobs that sort of fall outside of that. And things can get a little bit more interesting in freelance. Like maybe I can grab a, traditional artist job in freelance or whatever. Like they're kind of like offshoots and they're a little bit different than the mainstream. And then you have category number 3, which is independent art, which is if you can't find a demand for the type of stuff that you love to do, you create it. You create a space where that is in demand. So independent artists create a fan base. They create this environment where their art is in demand, which, just like musicians, when there's, songwriter or whatever, they gather fans and they gather this following and then they go straight to that market, right? So that would be the 3rd category. And that one, I think, may be my last resort. Thankfully, it's also the place I want to be the most. Because that's sort of like the dream. You make whatever you want and you just live off of that. So all of this AI stuff, it threatens the first 2. I think it almost obliterates the freelance stuff because it will just be immediately given to people that can type things on a computer, and it changes the mainstream. I don't think there will ever not be a demand for someone like me, but I just won't want to be there anymore if all I'm doing is this typing into computer shit. Like I don't want to do that. So it threatens me in that way. And it kind of weirdly pushes me towards the thing that I actually want to do, which is be a traditional artist. Unfortunately, the world doesn't really have a huge demand for that. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. Yeah. Does all of that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Here's a couple thoughts from me for whatever that's worth on that. So trying to draw some parallels into the software world a little bit. I kind of made my start in doing software development by essentially being a fixer of stuff. So I was doing freelance and I kind of tried to sell myself this way and set things up, and I kind of set a somewhat higher hourly rate knowing I would get fewer jobs. But I basically started out, I tried very hard to develop a very good understanding of what I was doing, and I paid a lot of attention to software architecture and just tried to have this deeper understanding. And so pretty often I would get somebody who had a project who would say, hey, I just got rid of my 3rd developer on this. They built this thing for me, this idea that I had. They built it really fast, and it was really inexpensive, but there's these problems that it has that they just have not been able to get around. And I hired somebody else and they weren't able to get around these problems either, and so on. And what would typically happen is that you would get people working on this had a who were they had sort of a shallow understanding of what was happening. So they were perfectly able to solve a problem by going onto Stack Overflow and copy pasting code and tweaking it until it worked and just kind of throwing stuff together until they got some feature working, and the UI would come together quickly and everything would start to function, but the deeper architecture of the project would be a mess. There's no real system to how things are organized. There's no compartmentalization of different things, never mind software architecture. Basically, in order to actually get something solid that was workable and maintainable, you needed somebody to come in and really take a look at the entire thing and really think about it and build something that was much more solid and much deeper. And that difference between this sort of shallow thinking and deep thinking was, I think, the fundamental thing there. And I think you see that across the board in all different fields, where it becomes easier and easier over time in many cases to do that shallower stuff where you can just throw something together. And now in the art world, it is trivially easy for anybody to generate an interesting image. I mean, that is the threshold that we crossed a few weeks ago. If you know the right URL right now, you can go type in stuff to a prompt and generate an image that no one has ever seen before, and it can actually be really compelling. So we're there, 100%. And that probably will continue to improve over time. But the depth of the art world, of really understanding the composition of things and what makes it compelling to a person and all of that, that is not part of that right now. And I don't think that it really will be.
Yes, I absolutely agree. It is so, because I made a bunch of images and I'm an artist and I was, I'm really trying to come up with meaningful things. And every single time, I mean, well, there's two aspects. One is that the computer, it doesn't understand relationships of one object to another object. Like, we have all of these associations. Like, if you put, I don't know, a knife next to your head, like that's scary, right? Like, right. You immediately know that knife plus, close proximity to a head, that's a scary thing. But to a computer, it's like there's no relationship whatsoever. Right. And that's why I just kind of blended the kid's arm into a fish. Like, it's just, everything just sort of bleeds together. There is no deeper meaning. It doesn't understand relationships at all. I was watching this thing on from John Oliver. He had this little AI, I don't know, episode or something. And I guess someone on Midjourney was just making a ton of John Oliver prompts or whatever. And I don't know, he went through a bunch of different ones. But one of them he kind of latched onto was, he typed in, John Oliver marries a cabbage, right? It's pretty straightforward there. But what it came up with was like, it's like two John Olivers and then a cabbage in front of them. Or like, I don't know, like, it was none of the images were John Oliver marrying a cabbage. Like, it could not figure that out. It had no idea what that was, because it's scanning all of these, images of marriages, and it's just like two people. And then it's scanning like cabbages. It couldn't figure it out. So there's this like emptiness to all of these images. And if you look through about 100 of them, you're like, wow, this is impressive. If you look through about 1,000 of them, you're like, these are all the same thing. Like, they're all totally empty. They do give a very impressive first impression, but then it's like it just fades so quickly, and there's nothing left over but this initial impression of something great, and then it's just gone. Like, it's so weird how unmeaningful all of these images are. And like that is something that both me and my friend noticed after doing this for a while. It's like, well, okay, the other thing that I was trying to say is that the other part of it is that you spend no quality time in creating this image. Mm-hmm. When I do an oil painting, I'm doing studies, I'm doing research, like, I'm connecting with the subject matter. I spend time thinking about it. Like, it's a part of me and my memories and relationships. Like there's so much that goes into a painting. Whereas when I just type in like some little prompt, it pops up. Like there is no connection between me and this thing. Like I didn't do it. The computer did it. I just gave it some words. Like there is, and then you're done. Like you could do a few variations or whatever, but there is no personal connection. There's no work being done. There's nothing. It's so empty that element is completely missing. And so that part of it gives me some hope because the computer kind of sucks at that right now. I'm not saying we'll never get there, but for right now, the images are so devoid of life. They have impressiveness, but they have no meaning or life to them.
Okay, totally agree. So that question of whether or not we will get there, in my mind, getting to the level of a human where we could generate images that are on that level, I think is almost would essentially require general intelligence level AI. Like that is this is a big question in the AI debate, and people go back and forth on whether or not we could get there or not. I think maybe it's possible, but we are not anywhere remotely close to that right now.
I think what I mean is, can we develop tools that allow the human to input more meaning into an image, right? Because right now you're just doing these very dry prompts that go in, are there, I don't know, maybe you develop this sort of avatar style, that's connected to you, this sort of meaningful filter that gets applied to everything. I don't know, but that's more of what I'm talking about, I think.
Yeah. And that seems more realistic, but well, I don't know. It's hard for me to say where that stuff is gonna be. I think right now, I mean, for you specifically, you want to make friends with this stuff. It sounds like you are, which is good.
I have to, yeah. And
right.
There's definitely a part of me that, like, I mean, there's a part of me that's a bit worried about the future of art. Like it's just going to change, and change is just a scary thing. And there's the other part of me that's just like, this is kind of fun. Like you just put stuff in and images are made. Like that's just a fun thing to do.
Right.
And it's kind of goofy and silly and whatever. So yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings on it.
Right. And just to kind of side note this a little bit, we're talking about this in terms of it replacing the job of many artists, and it will 100% already has. So that's a very real thing. But this is going to be used in other contexts as well, and it's always very hard to predict this stuff, but I think it might wind up being used in very interesting and maybe insidious ways.
Sorry, go ahead, finish your thought.
There's already this problem, I guess, with social media in that you can create a sort of fake version of yourself, and some of that is just behavioral. You only post pictures of you having a great time on vacation on Instagram, and you don't post pictures of yourself depressed in your bed at night or something, right? There's just this general broadcasting of some only temporarily real version of yourself. But there's a lot of tools in a lot of image software already, these sort of beautification stuff where you take a picture of yourself and it becomes enhanced. And you can see kind of unsettling examples of this if you look at people in both versions, where it'll reshape your face, it'll smooth out your skin, it'll change the look of your eyes and everything, and it winds up creating this fake reality. And you don't really know that. They're pretty good and they're pretty subtle, and often enough, I mean, there's obviously extreme examples where you can go, this is fake, but there's plenty where that isn't. And you're just seeing pictures of people that look beautiful and have all this enhancement to them, not on a movie where you kind of expect it, but just normal everyday stuff on social media. This ability to generate and morph images with diffusion modeling is a whole different level. And it will not be long before that stuff starts showing up there, and you could see all kinds of very interesting things. And who knows what that's going to end up like.
To me, the most interesting part of this whole thing is not the effect on the artists, because every time there's a new innovation, like it gets rid of jobs and it changes things, and that's scary, but it's also like so common. I mean, when new tools are introduced, like it changes the marketplace. People lose their jobs, but other people get new jobs. You know, there's gonna be a bunch of new jobs for software engineers or whatever.
Yeah.
So they can have my job. But that's
Thanks.
not really that interesting. It's everything else and everyone else, because this is going to affect everything. Like the whole planet is about to get this enormous flood of fake imagery that you will not be able to tell if it's real or not. I mean,
Yep.
it's kind of been a thing. Like here, they're like, oh, I can't tell if this image is real. Like, oh no, it's doctored because you can see this little thing right in the corner or whatever. But that's not going to be a thing anymore. Photography will no longer, like from this day forth, it will no longer be like this thing of proof. Like you can't use a picture as proof anymore. Like ever again. Never trust any picture you ever see again, because this is so good and it's only going to get better. And it's not, I think every time I start talking about AI art, people are like, yeah, whatever. But this is going to affect everyone
Well,
in so many weird ways. I mean,
yeah.
every news article, every post on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, like it's just everything is getting affected by this, or is just about to.
Actually, there's a big headline about this, but some dude won a state fair art contest, which I don't know how,
Yeah, I saw that.
right. I don't know how big of a deal the state fair art contest is, but it's not nothing. But he won it first place with an AI image. And actually, if you look at the image, it's pretty impressive. You look at that and go, that's a pretty cool image. I mean, at least for me as the naive normal
Yeah,
person, I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. I don't know what else was entered in there, but he won first place. And then he revealed that it was an AI image and people got kind of upset. And the ethics of it doesn't matter because that's reality.
it's just yeah. It doesn't matter about the image or the art contest or whatever. That's just that. That's where
Yeah.
we're at.
Yeah.
Like it's, you know.
So I think this is a big shift. I think I'm not sure where it'll end up, but it is definitely a major pivot. This is a new technology that the world has not seen before. And that's happened a lot. There's been a lot of new technologies that, mattered a lot, and some that everyone thought was going to matter a lot and kind of didn't. You think about 3D printing and go, wow, when that started becoming a
Yeah.
thing, people were like, oh my gosh, this is the end of factories and every human can make anything, and that it did
Right.
not go that way at all. And I'm a huge 3D printing enthusiast, but it makes crappy plastic thingies that takes a lot of trouble. It's fun, but it did not eat
Yeah,
the
yeah.
world like we thought. It's useful in certain industries. But then you look at the smartphone, and obviously we see where that went. But you remember that leading up to the iPhone, which was the major pivot, we had smartphones. And there was kind of that argument too. You can go find some old video of Steve Ballmer just cackling in joy when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, because Steve Ballmer thought it was just the stupidest thing ever. It's like, it's really expensive and we have a Windows phone and it's so much better. And we all saw how that went. But the iPhone, something about the jump from the BlackBerry and the Windows phone and the other smartphones that were there, they worked, they had internet, they did all that stuff. But the iPhone came around and it took it across some threshold where it became this moment of, holy crap, everyone in the world is going to get one of these. Or Android, which, kind of emulated a lot of what they did and became sort of an equivalent thing. That was the moment. And if you look at the AI stuff with imagery, it feels like we're at that moment where, yes, we've sort of been able to do this before. Yes, we've had Photoshop. You can create fake images that way. Yes, there's all these things historically that have sort of been able to do this. But in my mind, this is the moment. The fact that everybody at your concept art job installed this in their computers kind of speaks to that, where new era for not just art, but image generation. And it's going to be kind of interesting.
Right. And I would even say that this is not that moment, that we're not even to that moment yet, because it's not on everyone's iPhone yet. But it's
Well,
about to be. As soon as Apple, Google, whatever release their version of this and it's on your iPhone and everyone's phone, then we're at that
Well,
moment. And I think right now it's like the user interface is kind of difficult.
yeah.
I mean, you can use it, but it's not for the every person. Like using a Discord bot to create images, this is kind of weird, right? Because it's beta. It's not
Right.
their full version is not out yet.
Well, let's say it's like the moment when Steve Jobs announced the iPhone and showed it off on stage, and he's scrolling around going, "Look at this." It's kind of like that moment in my mind. I'm not saying this is gonna shift the world
Yeah,
the
yeah.
same way that smartphones did, but I think it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Any
okay, yeah. Well, there's this major question of, well, okay, I have two questions. One is, do you see this or some sort of equivalent happening in the music industry? How like people are gonna see how much money this generates. Well, what if we did it with music too? I mean, obviously the program would have to be completely different, but you know, the way of thinking is kind of there. So that's my question:
Yeah.
is do you think it would be this way in the music industry, or could be? And number two is, if the computer can, let's say the computer like achieves, full mastery of art, whatever. Okay. 20 years from now or whatever. If the computer can do it all, what matters? Like, what matters anymore? And if the computer can generate all the music in the world or whatever, like, do you just quit playing music, or do you just quit art? Like, what matters? And maybe that's too big of a question, or maybe it's, I don't know. But it's sort of made me think about things differently and think, okay, like I've lost. Like I cannot beat the technical game. Like I can't beat the computer in a technical battle. Like it just wins now. Like there's just no question about that. So it makes me question what really matters. And it's kind of steered me towards just doing that more. Like actually working on the stuff I want to work on and just kind of like giving up on the other game that I've been playing for the last few years. And it's just like, I don't know.
okay,
Maybe that's too big.
that's too many and too big. But here's a all right. Your first question, will this happen to music? Yes, that's the answer to that. I'm not saying that you can take the latent diffusion white papers and go implement a model that's going to do this to music, but in my mind, as far as I see it, there's nothing fundamentally different about it in that
Right.
you should be able I mean, we already have AIs that will generate music. It's nowhere near the level that, this is for imagery. In a sense, imagery is a lot simpler in that you can train a model on an image that's 512 pixels by 512 pixels. That's not very big, uh, and even still, you can take 5 billion of those, you can feed it into a model and train it on that. If you took 5 billion songs, the amount of data is just
Yeah.
astronomically bigger. So that just by itself makes this much more difficult to do. But fundamentally, I don't think there's any reason why it couldn't be done. And we've already seen some of that. So yeah, I don't know when, but it will happen eventually. I'm pretty sure. Uh, your second question of what's the point of living if AI can do everything a human can do. All I'll say is this, that I said this a minute ago, but I don't think that an AI gets to the level of doing really deep, really compelling art in the way that a human can anytime remotely soon. That's not what we have. I think it would take something again along the lines of almost a general intelligence, or at least like almost a piece of general intelligence. It would need to have the sensibilities and the feelings, maybe not feelings as the right word, but it would need to be a lot more human-like than what we have. And there's this whole separate question of, is AI going to hit the singularity where it becomes smarter than people? And it's a good question, and maybe it could, but what we have right now is nothing like that at all. It is not the kind of thing that is going to evolve and get out of control. It might in the future, but like right now, what we have is just way, way simpler than that. It's much more of a take an input, run it through this sort of filtery thing, and then spit out an output. It's not evolving into a human at all. So that question I think is way down the road of of, is it going to displace people? I do think that the thing to do right now is, one, learn how to use it and try and anticipate how it's going to be used, which, like we were talking about, I think it's going to be this sort of interactive process between a person and using the tool, and
Right.
having it iterate on an image as you make edits and things. That might not be very fun for you. That's also just, I think it's reality right now. So use it, but also invest your quality time into the depth part. Do the stuff that the AI can't do, that's going to be
Right.
really valuable in people. And one kind of weird upside is that there's going to be so many people who are just leaning on this to do their work. Like, in a sense, it's, in my mind, it's going to flatten the field a little bit, in that you're going to have fewer artists who develop a really deep understanding of,
Right.
lighting and composition and perspective and everything. Um,
Yeah, because they just lean on this.
right. That's just going to happen. That's happened in the software world. It's happened, that will be a side effect, which actually could benefit you if you're mindful enough to really invest your time into the deeper issues. What was the other thing you asked?
I mean, well, I agree with that.
Okay.
And that's what I see happening is, if you were an art student right now and you're like, well, what's the best way to get a job? Everybody's using AI art and 3D models. So, okay, there's a whole nother field for 3D modelers or whatever. But
Yeah.
if you're like an illustrator, you can learn the 3D modeling and the AI stuff, to bypass the drawing skills and
Yeah.
composition and stuff, and just use the tricks. But then that puts you in the exact same category as every single other person
Right.
that's there. So what do you bring with you? Like, what are you good at? What do you have that the AI does not?
Yeah.
Which is a very important question right now, because if you don't have anything else, then you may as well start applying at other places. Like, you have to bring something else.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I guess that's also kind of my answer to what's the point or whatever. I mean, you kind of said it. Spend your time on the stuff that you want to spend it on, and ideally the stuff that is deeper than what we're seeing, this more surface level aesthetic AI generated stuff. Like, go deeper than that, go deeper than the other artists. Uh, invest your time in those things.
And I kind of already said it, but one thing, playing around with this has kind of made me pay attention to, which I've thought about it before, but not really, is my experience with creating art. You get so wrapped up in the technical stuff, you kind of forget like how you experience the creation process. And when you get onto the computer and you just type in a couple things and it's created, even if that picture is way better than anything I've ever made, I don't think it is, but even if it was, it's like I have no personal connection with it
Yeah.
at all. I found no joy in that, like no fulfillment in that. Like, maybe it was a little bit fun, but there was no like deep fulfillment in that. And that kind of surprised me, I guess, because it makes me think of the way that I create art. It's not all about this end result or whatever. It's this process of just making me feel good while I'm working on it, and the whole sparking joy thing. I don't know. It's just,
Yeah.
that's sort of what I'm thinking about while I'm messing with this stuff. But okay,
Oh,
go ahead.
one quick thing. Actually, Dad brought this up. I was having a conversation with him about it because he was here last week.
He was at my house today, so
Oh, okay.
I also
Cool.
talked to him about this. But yeah,
Okay. Well, it's something he brought up, and I think this is a really good observation. If you were trying to differentiate between human art and this AI art, at least for now in the foreseeable future, this guy won the state fair art contest by submitting this AI generated piece of art. If you wanted to tell the difference, the way you could prove it is to show the process of creating a piece of art. because the AI does not generate that image in anything even remotely close to the way a person does. It does this weird denoising thing where it sort of morphs something out of nowhere. But if you wanted to prove that an image was real, then you could just show parts of the process of, okay, here's the basic, I don't know how you do it, but the outlines and the rough details and the backgrounds and things, and like show as you're creating that thing. But that's how you could differentiate between those two. And I don't, the way the diffusion modeling works right now, I don't see an AI being able to do that with the current techniques. Like, I don't think it could mimic that.
Well, I think this question is, I mean, there's no answer to this question, but in my mind, like that piece that's created with AI, it's art. Like it's still art.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it should be in the same category as the other art, but maybe it should. I don't know. Like trying to define what art is such a cliche thing to talk about, but it's like you can't just call it fake. You can't say it's not art because technically, like
Right.
it is art, even though a computer made it. Or you know, artists rely on accidents and you know random chance all the time. We rely on the you know how the paint moves. There's so many things we don't understand when we do a painting that we just accept and call our own. Like if someone wants to use a computer, that's still art. It's weird, and things have just got way weirder. But
Well,
I don't know.
never mind the philosophical part. Just in a very practical sense, if you want to prove to the other humans that you made a piece of art, to just show the process. Like
Right? Yeah.
that's all that thought is worth. Is just saying you should, at least for now, be able to do that. So
Yeah.
you know, the philosophical question of what is art, yeah, I don't spend way too much time being asked to think about that in music, and I find it pretty tedious.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's so many more things we can talk about, but we may as well wrap it up.
All right. Well, I bottom line for me is that, hey, everybody, the world just invented something new, and it's kind of a big deal. So
Yep.
buckle up.
Yep. We're all artists now.
Yep. It's gonna be weird. All right, that's us for tonight. Thank you everybody for listening. Sorry that Daniel decided to get COVID and ruin our podcasting schedule for the past month. I will admit fault for one of those weeks, but the other three were entirely him. So blame him for that. But we should be back now, going strong. We hope. Fingers crossed. So thank you again for listening through this. Remember, you can leave us reviews on our podcast platforms, and in some cases, leave us comments. So we would love to see that. That really does help us out a lot. So thank you for everybody who's done that. We're also on YouTube. You can leave us comments here. We always read them. We really, really love them. We have merch if you're interested in that. We have a whiskey glass and a coaster. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening and to listening to us freak out a little bit about AI. See you next week.